Welcome to the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our coaching, publishing, executive ghostwriting, and podcast production services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I am Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. Today, we're being joined by Dr. Paul Jenkins, author of Pathological Positivity. Dr. Paul, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Paul. I'm glad to be with you.
And I've always wanted to say the words Dr. Paul, so that works perfectly.
Perfect. We're a pair of Pauls today.
Yes, sir. Well, Paul, we are thrilled to have you. Are you ready to begin?
I am ready. Let it roll.
All right. Question number one. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing their book?
The biggest piece of advice I can give you is get out of your own way. I'm saying that as a psychologist. There's a lot of psychological ways that we kind of get in our own way, but also sometimes we think we have to do it all ourselves. And that is not true. And it's especially not true when it comes to publishing a book. You're going to need some help. And there's a lot of different kinds of help that we need, but I think that's where I'd go with it, Paul. I'd say get out of your own way. Don't be so proud that you don't allow other people to actually have some input in that process.
And what do you feel is the hardest part about getting published?
Besides what I just said, there are a lot of unknowns, especially for a new author. It's hard to know exactly when you're done editing, for example, or what to do with it once you feel like it's at a point where someone else might enjoy it. So I think the hardest part is just knowing all of those moving pieces and associating with people who have done it before, talking to people who have some expertise or experience. All of those things can really help you to get past that. But I'm thinking that's probably the hardest part, just not knowing the field.
Well, let's talk about marketing. So please share a marketing strategy that you have used in your book launch that has worked well.
I would say the number one marketing strategy for me has been speaking. In fact, when I was working with my creative editor and we were setting up our plan for getting the book published, he asked me, "Are you a speaker?" And he asked me that question because he knew that speakers can move books. And I started taking my public speaking seriously. Now, there's a lot of different venues where you can do it, but you have to ask yourself, how are people going to know about me and why would they listen to me? If you can condense your ideas that are going into the book into a presentation or a speech and give that in as many places and contexts as possible, that's going to interest people in your book. And I have sold far more books through my speaking, and I do this on YouTube as well. I have a daily channel, I do a podcast, I'm speaking wherever I can. So I'm not talking just the traditional, get on the microphone in the front of the room kind of speaking. I'm saying open your mouth and share your story so that people get an interest and then they'll be more interested in your book.
Well, and you're referring to public speaking not only in person, but also on these YouTube videos and getting out there and doing things like that, correct?
Absolutely, yes. And that's where a lot of people are consuming content now. Podcasting, for example, is a great place where people can share their ideas. You could be a guest on someone else's podcast. You could publish like you said, a YouTube video. I've done a lot of YouTube videos. So yes, not just the traditional speaking at the mic in front of a room full of people, although that is another place where I've done a lot of marketing of my book as well. But open up your mind. Think of the different places where people gather and how you can present that message to them.
Well, speaking of books, I'd like to know what is your favorite book and what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
And I saw that question come through in my preparations for this interview, Paul, and I thought that is not fair because there are so many books and so many really good books. I would say my favorite book changes depending on what I've read recently. And one of the best books that I've read recently is by Mo Gadot. It's called Solve for Happy. The thing that I learned from that book is that an engineer, Mo Gadot is a civil engineer, came up with some of the same philosophies that I did in my book, Pathological Positivity, but from a very different angle. And what it taught me, and the reason that it's currently my favorite book, and it changes, okay, I gave you that disclaimer. The reason that's important to me is because I think principles determine all of life's outcomes. And when you can see two people arriving at the same principles from very different perspectives, it just solidifies the validity of that principle. And I had a lot of fun with the book for that reason.
And for a final question, what is your favorite quote and why?
My favorite quote came from a 93-year-old neighbor. Just before she passed away, I was asking her what she had learned from her life. And this quote comes from her. She said, "Don't be too quick to believe everything you think." And it surprised me. I was expecting everything you read, or everything that you hear on the internet. No, she said, don't be too quick to believe everything you think. And Paul, that ties right back to that first question for me. Get out of your own way. Don't be too quick to believe everything that you think, especially the things that you think about yourself or your ability to create a book that people are going to enjoy. We can get stuck in our own thinking. So that quote has stuck with me ever since she shared it.
Well, Dr. Paul, I want to thank you for being a guest on the show. What is the best way for people to find you online?
Quickest, easiest way, just go to my website. It's drpauljenkins.com. That's spelled with a D-R. Paul, the same way you spell it, and Jenkins, Jenkins, drpauljenkins.com.
Well, Dr. Paul, I want to thank you once again for being on the show, and I wish you all the best in your author journey ahead.
My pleasure. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how you can be featured in our brand new Get Published business book, go to getpublishedpodcast.com.